Orthography refers to the way systems of writing and spelling work. This is going to be the focus of today's episode, but just before we get into it, I'd like to make a small correction. In the last episode, I stated that an example of allophony in English is seen in the plural s, sometimes being pronounced s, as in cakes, and sometimes z, as in ravens. However, this is technically not allophony, as it only behaves this way in certain morphemes, that is, certain meaningful chunks of words. True allophony applies based only on the phonetic environment and has nothing to do with morphology. The plural s is actually an example of allomorphy, where multiple variants of a morpheme exist. We'll talk more about morphology in the coming episodes, but I thought it was important to point this mistake out while phonology is still fresh in our minds. A better example of allophony in English is of aspiration. English voiceless stops are generally followed by a small puff of air that we call aspiration. If you put your hand in front of your mouth when you say pan, tan and can, you'll feel it. However, these stops are allophonically deaspirated after a syllable initial fricative, as in span, stan and scan. Given that this is fully predictable from the phonetics alone, it's an example of allophony. Thank you again to the person who pointed this out. Anyway, let's get on with the episode. As I mentioned earlier, orthography is the study of how languages are written and spelled. It's worth noting that not all languages are written, only slightly over 50%, and this proportion would have been far, far lower in pre-colonial times, or even just a couple of centuries ago. A lot of people believe that writing is some sort of inherent aspect of language, in the same way as phonology or syntax, but in fact it's simply a tool invented by humanity in the same way as paper or the internet. Language itself is an aspect of human evolution, having developed gradually through biological means sometime between 100,000 and 2 million years ago. The first writing, however, only appeared 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia and developed from earlier systems which were far simpler. The first thing to consider, then, is whether your Conlang actually needs an orthography at all. This is a perfectly acceptable step to skip if you don't want to do it, and you wouldn't actually be unnaturalistic in the least by doing so. However, while the in-universe speakers of your Conlang may not write it down, you probably still need to. After all, how else could you figure out the complex grammar, syntax, and all the many words you probably want your Conlang to have, without being able to write any of it out? It would be nigh on impossible to do in your head. Enter transcription. Transcription is the word for representing spoken language as writing. If you're transcribing an unwritten language, the number one thing to remember is to make your transcription regular. Writing systems with irregularity and lots of exceptions to spelling rules, like English, get that way through use and evolution. Writing is a tool, so if your aim is to transcribe a language for linguistic purposes, you'd want to make it as simple to use and understand as possible. There are two main ways we can approach transcription. Either we can transcribe languages using the IPA, or we can use another pre-existing script, such as Latin or Cyrillic. IPA would of course be the most neutral and straightforward, but it's often quite hard to type, and not all apps and fonts support it. When linguists are transcribing previously unwritten languages, therefore, they often use another script. Latin, which is the name for the script used by English, Polish, Swahili, Navajo, and about 1,500 other languages, is the most common choice, as it's the most used script in the world, and is usually the native script of the linguists responsible. For some languages, a mix of Latin and IPA is used, because Latin is often not very good at representing the contrasts of other languages. For instance, the Maasai language uses Latin for most sounds, but IPA for the or, and ng sounds. Transcribing a language into the Latin script is called Romanization. In the same way, transcribing into Cyrillic is called Cyrilization, and transcribing into Chinese characters is called Sinicization. These words can also be used to refer to processes not of transcription, but transliteration. That is, rewriting a language that normally uses another writing system. If we transcribe a language into another script, say Latin, the goal is to represent the spoken language, so we write in a way that reflects the phonemes present in that language. However, if we are transliterating the language, we generally try to match the way we write to the spelling system of the source language. In most cases, it won't much matter which of these options we use, as many languages use fairly phonemic scripts. For some languages, though, it can make a big difference, as spelling may have been standardized hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. Tibetan is a great example of this. The Tibetan spelling system was standardized in the early 9th century, and hasn't changed since, even though speech has. There's therefore a big difference between the spoken and written forms of the language, so it makes a big difference whether we transcribe or transliterate it. So, that's the basics of romanization and transliteration, but what are you actually transliterating? Well, you may want to create your own original writing system. As I've mentioned, English uses the Latin script to write, along with loads of other languages. The way this system works is probably quite familiar to you. We write, usually with a pen or by typing on a computer, a series of discrete, abstract symbols, which represent either a consonant or a vowel sound, and these symbols are written and read left to right in horizontal rows running down the page. In some languages, like Finnish or Hawaiian, each letter represents just one sound, and each sound is represented by just one letter. In other languages, like English, each letter can represent multiple sounds, and many sounds are represented in several ways. As you may be able to guess from my description, every part of this varies between systems. Let's start by looking at the type of script. There are 5 primary types of writing system in use around the world: logographies, syllabaries, abjads, abogidas, and alphabets. Alphabets are probably the type you know best. In an alphabet, consonants and vowels are both assigned separate letters to represent them. Latin is an alphabet, as well as many other scripts, like Greek, Cyrillic, Hangul, Nko, and Georgian. Abogidas are similar to alphabets, but while they use consonants in about the same way, vowels do not have the same status of full letters. Instead, they're added onto the consonants as diacritics or accent marks. Each consonant letter also has an inherent vowel, so no diacritic is used if users want to transcribe that consonant-vowel sequence. Many systems also have a diacritic to negate this vowel, for when a consonant comes word finally or before another consonant. Were Latin an abogida, English might look something like this. Real-world examples of abogidas include Devanagari, Bengali, Thai, Ge'ez, and Canadian syllabics. An abjad is the next step up from an abugida. In this type of script, vowel diacritics are completely absent, or sometimes optional, while consonants remain the primary letters. Today, Arabic and Hebrew are the only abjads in widespread use, but historical scripts include Phoenician, Syriac, and Pahlavi. The next type of script is the syllabary. In these systems, each symbol represents a syllable, most often a CV, VC, or CVC structure. Examples include the Japanese kana, Vai, Cherokee, Yi, and the extinct Nushu script. The final script type is the logography. The previous four types are different ways to transcribe sound, but logographic scripts are different. Each symbol of a pure logography is used for a different word, with no relation to what the word sounds like. Examples include Chinese characters, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, Mayan, and the Khitan large script. These 5 classes are not independent, however. Many scripts, if not most of them, combine features of multiple types. For example, while Chinese is often referred to as a prime logography, it does actually have phonetic marking. Many characters are made up of both a phonetic element and an element indicating their meaning. Egyptian hieroglyphs were even more complex, acquiring in their 3,000 or so years of use elements of every type of script I've outlined so far, with the symbol's meaning dependent on how it was used and the context of the symbols around it. Non-logographic scripts also merge types and blur the boundaries of the different script classifications. Hebrew is an abjad, but in some situations it's today more common always to use vowel marking, meaning it behaves more like an abugida than it did in the past. Both it and Arabic also allow use of the w and y letters to denote vowels, which in theory pure abjads shouldn't do. It could even be argued that the English writing system is not purely alphabetic, but also has features of a logography, as while our letters do represent individual sounds, this is so irregular that some words act more as single-standing units, which are recognised as a whole, rather than as being composed of phonemic elements. When creating a script for your own Conlang, pick one of the 5 types I've outlined, but feel free also to borrow features of other scripts, or create something intermediate to 2 or more categories. Next, let's talk about writing direction. The Latin script runs left to right across a page in rows, and these rows are laid out vertically from top to bottom. When we read, our eyes start at the top left and run sideways to the edge of the page, then jump down a row and back to the far left. This is the same system used by Cyrillic, Greek, Armenian, and modern Chinese. Scripts like Arabic and Hebrew, however, do the opposite. They still organise their horizontal lines top to bottom, but they start on the right and move to the left. Other scripts do yet more things. Early ancient Greek, for instance, used a system known as boustrophodon, which literally means turning like an ox, in reference to the ploughing of a field. In boustrophodonic scripts, writing progresses across the page in one direction, then completely flips and does the second row in the opposite direction, alternating each row in its direction. This is very handy, as it means your pen, or your eyes when reading, don't need to scan all the way across the page to reach the next line. They just drop down and carry on from almost exactly the same spot. Importantly, it's not just the direction of writing that flips, but the orientation of each letter as well, so the letters of the second row will be mirrored from those in the first. This system is quite rare, and usually only occurs as an intermediate step when a writing system changes direction, perhaps because of the extra effort involved in interpreting mirrored writing. A related system was employed for the Rongo-Rongo script of Easter Island, but rather than mirroring each line, it was rotated a full 180 degrees in a snaking fashion named reverse boustrophodon. Non-horizontal scripts exist too. Traditionally, several East Asian scripts, such as Chinese and Mongolian, were written in columns running top to bottom. In Mongolian, these were then ordered left to right, while in Chinese and Japanese, they were ordered right to left, hence why modern Japanese manga books, even in English, are read from the right cover to the left. A few scripts also run bottom to top, such as Hanunuo, which is used in the Philippines. The Ogham script, which was used to write ancient Irish, broke the pattern of being written in rows entirely. It was often used for monumental inscriptions, in which case it ran along the edge of a standing stone, starting at the bottom left, running up over the top, then down the right-hand side. However, in later times it was written on parchment, when it used the Latin approach of going left to right and top to bottom. Egyptian hieroglyphs had no fixed direction. Their default was to go from right to left and top to bottom, but they could also go in any direction. In some instances, they were made to face towards the image of a god, or arranged in line with symmetry. A reader would be able to tell which way they faced, as they were always arranged facing towards the direction of writing. If they were to be read left to right, they would face left, while if they were to be read right to left, they would face right. So, what informs the direction of a writing system? Why do some go one way, while others go other ways? Short answer, we don't fully know. In some cases, it may effectively just be random, having emerged as standard from the chaos of mixed directions. One factor that's thought to influence direction, however, is writing medium. In English, as in Latin and Greek before us, we write on paper, or parchment in the ancient world, primarily using ink. And as any left-handed person can probably tell you, this smudges very easily. It may well be that we write left to right for exactly this reason. Most people are right-handed, so to stop our hands smudging the ink, we need to write starting on the left and leave the ink behind as we go. Semitic scripts like Arabic and Hebrew, however, may originally have been more often carved into stone, which involves holding a hammer in the right hand and a chisel in the left, and strikes would therefore knock the chisel to the left, so a right-to-left direction makes more sense. Of course, both the Semitic scripts and the European scripts historically used both methods, so these conventions may reflect a time when literacy was rarer and writing was more shaped by the practices of the time. Now, writing medium actually shapes a lot more than just the direction of writing. It influences how the system works as well. Writing on and using different things tends to create letters of different shapes. For instance, wood has a grain to it. This is the lines running down a plank of wood from the fibres of a tree trunk. If you attempt to score down these fibres, you'll push them apart, which damages the structural integrity of the wood. Writing on a horizontal piece of wood therefore presents horizontal strokes from consistently being made, so writing systems which develop like this are composed only of vertical and diagonal lines. We see this in the runic scripts of ancient Germania, including those used by the Vikings and Anglo-Saxons. On the other side of the world, the Burmese people use a very circular script, because they historically wrote on palm leaves, the fibres of which would rip if straight lines were used. In ancient Mesopotamia, writing was done on clay using a sharp-edged stylus, so cuneiform, the writing system which developed there, is made up of straight lines and wedges from the corner of the stylus. In Europe, the Latin script was originally carved into stone, where curved lines are harder to form than with ink, but as more people started using it, a second, curvier style developed, which gave our modern distinction between uppercase, originally stone-carved letters, and lowercase, which developed on paper. Each medium has its own characteristics that are worth learning about, as they provide the multitude of aesthetics for the world's writing systems. You can easily learn about this by studying writing, but if you want to take it a step further, why not get yourself a stylus and clay, some palm leaves, or a calligraphy brush? Being able to create writing as the speakers of your Conlang would, using the tools available in the environment they live in, helps you understand the tactile restraints on each medium and give closer insight into the world of your language. Different types of writing system tend to have different character complexities. Imagine a logography, like Chinese characters. Since many words in the language, and sometimes also a number of phonetic elements, need their own word, there are thousands of different symbols needed to write the language. If the characters were similar in complexity to Latin, made up of just a couple of strokes, there'd be no way to create that many symbols, so that every symbol looked distinct, even if written quickly. On the other hand, an alphabet only needs about as many letters as the language has phonemes, so generally around 10 to 40. If every one of these were intricately detailed, writing even just a single word would take as long as writing a sentence in Chinese. Hopefully it thus makes sense why script types which have more characters tend to be more complex in form, while those with fewer are simpler. This also comes down to how writing systems develop. Like language, writing systems do not start out in their modern form. They evolve and change over time, as they're transferred between cultures, change writing medium, or just get eroded or consciously altered by their users. Interestingly, the path of development taken is usually about the same, moving from more complex logographies to simpler, more phonetic scripts. Logographies initially develop from simple pictures of what they represent. So the word for a shepherd's crook would be a picture of a crook, water a picture of water, ox a picture of an ox, and the word for eye would use a picture of an eye. Over time, these elements simplify in form and change in their use. They may acquire phonetic elements and slowly drift towards ever more sound-based usage. I won't go too far into the details of this, as it could be a whole video on its own, but I have left a link to an excellent video from the channel Native Lang on the topic. However, let's have a quick look at one or two real-world examples. Our Latin alphabet has its roots in the logographic Egyptian hieroglyphs, which developed in the mid to late 4th millennium BC and died out in the mid-1st millennium AD. In the early 2nd millennium BC, we see a new script appear, derived from hieroglyphs, but used to write an ancient Canaanite language related to Hebrew and Phoenician. This is what we call the Proto-Sinaitic script. It had just a limited set of symbols compared to hieroglyphs, which it used not as a logography, but as an abjad. With time, this then evolved into the Phoenician script, which was used to write the Phoenician language of the Eastern Mediterranean. This is the ancestor to many other scripts, including the Semitic abjads and to the Abugidas of South Asia. The Phoenicians were traders, and one of the civilizations they traded with was ancient Greece, who adapted the Phoenician abjad to fit their own language. They didn't have many of the guttural consonants of Phoenician, so these letters were adapted to write vowels, creating an alphabet. This was then passed on to the Etruscans, and finally the Romans, who spread their new Latin alphabet across the empire. Writing has been independently invented only 4 or 5 times across the world. Hieroglyphs are one, but another instance is of the Chinese characters. Like hieroglyphs, these emerged from a rudimentary proto-writing, which around the 13th century BC had developed into a full logographic system known as the Oracle Bone script. This is attested until around 1000 BC, when its development made it even more abstract, bringing it to a stage we call bronze script, since it was generally cast into bronze after being inscribed into clay moulds. Its form developed over time, and by around 250 BC, it had acquired the overall square shape common in modern East Asian scripts. This is the period we call seal script. It was used by the state of Qin, who soon grew to become a very short-lived royal dynasty, until the Han dynasty succeeded them, and a new style of writing, known as clerical script, came into use. This lasted until the 3rd century AD, when it was adapted into the regular script, the style used until the introduction of simplified characters by the Chinese Communist Party from the 50s in China, and regular script still being used in Taiwan today. In the 5th century AD, the characters were taken up to write the Japanese language, which is completely unrelated to the Chinese languages. In Japanese, these characters are called kanji. In the mid-7th century, some kanji began being used unaltered in form, but to represent the sounds of Japanese rather than for meaning, a system known as manyogana. By around 800 AD, these characters had been simplified, creating 2 new systems, the katakana and the hiragana, which are both syllabaries. It was probably easier for kanji to evolve into a syllabary than an abjad, like hieroglyphs did, as Chinese words are mostly monosyllabic, so the shift wasn't a great one. So, when creating a script, remember, there are different types of script that can run in different directions. They're shaped by their medium of writing and evolve over time, generally starting with pictures, developing into full logographies that represent all parts of a language, then maybe or maybe not becoming more phonetic over time. As this happens, the number of characters used shrinks, and the characters become simpler in form. Next episode we'll move on to exploring grammar, starting with the basics of morphology. If you want to catch that, consider subscribing, and check the playlist on screen if you're watching in the future. Until then, thank you for watching.